It's 89 AD in Capua, and the crowd in the arena is losing their minds. A gladiator has just taken down 3 opponents in brutal combat. Blood stains the sand. People cheer wildly. The emperor smiles from his seat above, and as a reward for the warrior's survival and skill, he's given something strange, something not made of gold, not freedom, not even public honor. He's handed a woman, a defeated Dian prisoner. She's dragged in chains, terrified, and taken into the dark chambers under the arena. This wasn't illegal. It wasn't even frowned upon. It was a reward, a tradition. The Roman Empire gave its champions what they called Victoria Carnalis, a carnal victory. This wasn't a hidden scandal. Roman writers mentioned it openly. Juvenal wrote about it in his Satire 6. Suetonius described it in his writings about the emperors. Martial mentioned it in his poetry without holding back. Rome is known for law, great thinkers, and majestic architecture. But it also turned women into living prizes, trophies for warriors soaked in blood. Today, you're going to see what ancient Roman writers really said happened after the cheering stopped. Not the heroic stories you see in movies. The truth, the part no one ever taught you. The part Rome proudly recorded. Imagine living as someone else's property. You're locked inside stone barracks called ludi, trained not to think but to kill. You eat scraps, sleep on hard floors, and your life is measured in fights. And if somehow you survive, if you manage to stay alive long enough to make tens of thousands of Romans scream your name, you earn a prize. But not just coins or wine. In many cases, the prize was a woman. From the 1st to the 3rd century AD, there were over 250 arenas spread across the Roman Empire. Gladiators weren't free men. They were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Rome didn't see them as full humans. And when one won a fight, the editor, the man running the games, would offer a reward: money, a warm bed for one night, or Victoria Carnalis. This term, Victoria Carnalis, meant access to captured women. Usually they were prisoners taken from war, Dians, Britons, Gauls, Germans. They had no rights, no protection, no say in what happened to them. They weren't prostitutes. They were war trophies, owned by the empire. Giving them away cost Rome nothing. It wasn't random cruelty. It was calculated. Rome used it to reward without spending a single coin and to send a brutal message to its enemies. Not even your women are safe. Seneca, one of Rome's most respected philosophers, once said something that still chills the bones. I came home more greedy, more cruel, more inhuman, because I had been among humans. He wasn't talking about war. He was talking about the games. Rome had turned violence into routine, pain into policy, and torture into entertainment. And they kept records of it all, carefully, proudly, as if it were grain inventory or tax reports. Now that you understand how this system worked, let's look at what Roman poets and historians actually described happening in those dark, underground rooms. Juvenal and Martial didn't speak in rumors. They wrote about what they saw. After a fight, the master of games would go down beneath the arena, into a place called the hypogeum, a maze of tunnels and holding cells hidden beneath the sand. Suetonius wrote that victorious gladiators were given bronze tablets listing their reward options. If they chose Victoria Carnalis, they were led to cells where female captives waited. Martial described how these women often still wore the same torn clothes they'd been captured in. Some had been cleaned and groomed, prepared by attendants to be presentable. The gladiator would point to the one he wanted. Guards would unlock her chains and drag her away. The women were taken to what Roman officials coldly called reward chambers. These weren't just empty spaces. They were part of the arena's design, built for this exact purpose. Archaeologists have found small stone rooms in amphitheaters across the empire. Inside, there were benches carved from stone, iron rings attached to the walls, and heavy doors that locked from the outside. They weren't built for comfort. They were built for control. Juvenal, in his bitter satire, made fun of the entire practice, but never denied it happened. He compared the giving of women to handing out coins or wine. That's how ordinary it was. Not a rare treat, just another item on a gladiator's reward list. And behind it all was an organized system. Clerks would record the details in ledgers. One Dian female, around 20 years old, transferred to gladiator Gaius for Victoria Carnalis, a human being written down like a borrowed tool. This wasn't just about rewarding fighters. It was psychological warfare. Tacitus, another Roman historian, wrote that Rome didn't just want to defeat its enemies in battle, it wanted to break them completely. And what better way to do that than by taking their daughters, their wives, the very women they tried to protect, and giving them to slaves as entertainment? Cassius Dio described what happened after Rome conquered Dacia in 106 AD. Thousands of captives were dragged to Rome, not just commoners, but high-born women, daughters of chieftains, wives of tribal leaders. These women were considered sacred in their own lands, but to Rome they were tools. When Emperor Trajan held a massive celebration that lasted 123 days, these women were handed over as rewards for gladiators. That was the message Rome sent: resist us, and this is what happens to your people. Suetonius wrote that after every major victory, the number of captured women exploded. There were so many that arenas used them like cheap currency, freely given to fighters without touching the empire's gold. The logic was brutal but effective, and it was all legal. Marshall once witnessed one of these reward moments. He wrote, "The victor takes his prize just as Rome takes its tributes, by right, without mercy and without shame." That wasn't criticism. It was simply the way things were. The conquered didn't deserve pity. In Rome's eyes, they existed for the pleasure of those who conquered them. It was a twisted kind of justice, one that had been written into law, managed by officials, and carried out without a second thought. What made all of this even more horrifying was how organized it was. This wasn't chaos or the result of a few cruel men. It was a system. Arena managers kept detailed lists of the women available for rewards. Their age, where they came from, their health. Everything was written down like they were merchandise. Suetonius even described the role of the procurator munerum, the man in charge of everything from animal cages to prisoner distribution. He worked directly with military commanders who supplied these women straight from the battlefield. Every campaign, Gaul, Germania, Britannia, Dacia, added to the empire's supply of captives. These women were marched across the empire, processed through camps, and sent to arenas like cargo. And if Rome wasn't fighting a war, the supply dropped. Cassius Dio noted that in years without conquest, managers had to offer money instead of women. Think about that. The reward system depended on war just to keep going. Juvenal, with biting sarcasm, once wrote that some gladiators preferred women over money because while coins run out, Rome's enemies never do. These reward chambers weren't forgotten rooms. They were cleaned, managed, guarded, but not to protect the women, only to make sure no one else took what was earned. The system had rules, and even cruelty had to be kept in order. Now here's where it becomes truly disturbing. This system didn't just need gladiators and prisoners, it needed silence. It needed an entire society to look away. Seneca, the philosopher who admitted the games made him cruel, also described something else in his letters. He talked about sitting in the crowd surrounded by Roman families, fathers with their sons, mothers with daughters, and no one protested. No one asked questions. Why? Because in Rome, to speak against the empire was to risk everything. Rome had something called dignitas, a person's public honor. If you questioned imperial power, you risked losing your dignity, your status, even your life. So people stayed silent. Even when women were dragged under the arena like livestock, the crowds kept watching. Tacitus recorded one moment that said it all. During Emperor Tiberius's rule, a senator named Marcus Valerius questioned whether these arena practices matched Roman virtues. Within weeks, he was charged with treason, stripped of everything, and exiled. That was the message. Speak up and you're next. Juvenal described senators bringing their daughters to the games, letting them watch the horrors from childhood. That was how Rome raised its next generation, through spectacle, through silence, by teaching them this was normal. Not everyone stayed silent forever. There were moments when Rome's mask cracked, even if only briefly. Cassius Dio wrote about Emperor Commodus, famous for loving the arena more than ruling. He began picking out Roman women, not captives, but daughters of senators and noble families, and offering them to his favorite fighters. One of them was the daughter of a man named Quintus Pomponius. She was a Roman citizen protected by law until Commodus decided she wasn't. When guards came to take her, her father stood in the doorway. They killed him on the spot. She was dragged away anyway. That night, the empire's elite began planning to kill the emperor. Not because of his cruelty, they had accepted that for years, but because he crossed the line between them and the conquered. He made their daughters into trophies. Commodus was assassinated soon after, not for morality, but out of fear. Tacitus described another moment during Nero's rule. After the Great Fire of Rome, Nero blamed the Christians. In the arena, Christian women were tortured before execution. Marshall wrote about it in awful detail, but this time people began leaving the arena quietly, not protesting, just walking out. Nero's guards blocked the exits. Still, disgust had begun to show.